Before we begin, this story contains descriptions of violence against an elderly person. If that's something you need to step away from, we understand. Take care of yourself first. This episode's narration is AI generated. The research, writing, and editorial decisions behind every story are made with care for accuracy and respect for those involved. On the 9th of May, 1671, a man walked into the Tower of London, bludgeoned the 77-year-old keeper of the crown jewels with a mallet, flattened the imperial state crown, and stuffed it under his clerical coat. He was caught sprinting toward the gate, crown still under his coat, the scepter dropped behind him, the royal orb shoved down his accomplice's breeches. This was high treason. The penalty was death. The king gave him a pardon and a pension worth £500 a year. The keeper got less than 300, never paid in full. You're listening to The Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, the heist that shouldn't have worked, and the reward that shouldn't have happened. The Tower of London, Spring 1671. The crown jewels, the imperial state crown, the scepter with the cross, the sovereign's orb, sat behind an iron grille in a basement chamber beneath the apartment of Talbot Edwards, the newly appointed master of the jewel house. Edwards was 77 years old. For a small fee, he'd escort visitors downstairs and let them view the jewels through the grillework. It was a living. It was routine. And in April of 1671, a parson and his wife knocked on his door and asked to see the crown. The parson was tall, soft-spoken, dressed in black clerical garb. His wife was quiet, modest. They paid the fee. Edwards led them down to the jewel house. They admired the crown. They thanked him, and as they turned to leave, the woman clutched her stomach and gasped. She needed spirits, something for the pain. Edwards' apartment was directly above the jewels. His wife, Mrs. Edwards, invited them upstairs to recover. They stayed for 20 minutes. The woman sipped water. The parson expressed his gratitude. They left. Edwards thought nothing of it. A kind deed for a stranger, that's what it looked like. What Edwards didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the illness was theatre. The parson wasn't a parson. His name was Colonel Thomas Blood, and he'd just learned 3 things. The keeper was elderly, the keeper lived directly above the jewels, and the keeper's family was kind. Colonel Blood was an Anglo-Irish former Cromwellian officer who'd lost his lands after the Restoration. He'd already tried to storm Dublin Castle. He'd already attempted to kidnap and murder the Duke of Ormond, dragging him from his carriage in London. Blood didn't plan small. And the crown jewels weren't just symbols. They were revenge. Micro cliffhanger 1. He came back, not once, several times. For the following days, Blood returned with gifts. 4 pairs of white gloves for Mrs. Edwards. Conversation, friendship. He spoke of a nephew, a young man with an income of several £100s a year, respectable, eligible. Would the Edwards consider a marriage alliance with their daughter? For a 77-year-old keeper earning a modest crown salary, this was attractive. Blood was no longer a visitor. He was a friend. He was family, almost. And when he asked if he could bring his nephew to meet the Edwards, and perhaps view the jewels one more time before a celebratory dinner Mrs. Edwards was preparing, Talbot Edwards said yes. It was the morning of May 9th, 1671. Blood arrived with his nephew and 2 other men. Mrs. Edwards was upstairs preparing dinner. Edwards led the 4 men down to the jewel house basement. The door closed. The Tower of London is a fortress, stone walls 10 feet thick, multiple gates, drawbridges, warders everywhere. It's designed to keep people in or out. But Blood wasn't trying to break in. He'd been invited. Micro cliffhanger 2, and when that door closed, the kindness ended. A cloak was thrown over Edward's head. The mallet came down, a sickening crack against the old man's skull. Edwards collapsed. They bound him. They gagged him. One of them stabbed him, not fatally, but enough to keep him down. Blood removed the iron grille. He lifted the imperial state crown, heavy, gold, encrusted with jewels, the symbol of English monarchy. Too large to hide. so he struck it with the same mallet he'd used on Edwards's skull. Again, flattening it, bending it, until it fit beneath his clerical coat. His accomplice Hunt took a file to the scepter with the cross. It was too long for the bag. The sound of metal scraping metal echoed in the basement. He sawed it in half. The third man, Perrault, grabbed the sovereign's orb, a golden sphere representing divine authority, and shoved it down the front of his breeches. Edwards, bleeding and bound on the floor, fought his restraints. The gag loosened. He began to shout, "Treason! Murder! The crown is stolen!" Upstairs, Mrs. Edwards was preparing dinner for the engagement celebration. The nephew was supposed to meet their daughter. The future looked bright. Then she heard her husband screaming. Micro cliffhanger 3. At that exact moment, Wythe Edwards, Talbot's son, returning from military service in Flanders, arrived at the Jewel House door. One of Blood's men had been posted outside as a lookout. He challenged Wythe, "Who are you? State your business." Wythe pushed past him, went upstairs. The lookout shouted to Blood, "We're discovered." Blood and his men bolted. They sprinted towards St. Catherine's Gate, where horses were waiting. They dropped the scepter. It clattered onto the stone pathway. Tower warders scrambled. Blood fired his pistol at the pursuing guards. One fell, wounded. Blood joined the shouts himself. "Treason! The crown is stolen!" Mimicking the alarm, running alongside his own pursuers, sowing confusion. At the drawbridge, a guard raised his musket. He froze. He didn't fire. On the Tower Wharf, Captain Beckman, Wythe Edwards' brother-in-law, closed the distance. Blood spun and fired again. The shot went wide. Beckman tackled him before he reached Iron Gate. The crown tumbled from Blood's coat onto the wharf stones. Blood struggled against his captors, shouting. It was a gallant attempt, however unsuccessful. It was for a crown. They dragged him back to the tower. They asked his name, his accomplices, his motive. Blood refused to answer. He would speak to only one man, the king whose crown he'd tried to steal. King Charles II agreed to meet him. Blood was brought to the palace in chains. The king asked questions. Blood answered audaciously. He claimed the crown jewels were worth only £6,000, not the £100,000 the crown valued them at. He was critiquing the crown's accounting while standing in chains for stealing it. Then he confessed, casually, that he'd previously planned to assassinate the king while Charles bathed in the Thames. But he'd been overcome with awe of majesty and abandoned the plot. The Duke of Ormond, Blood's previous target, the man Blood had dragged from a carriage and tried to murder, stood in the room, waiting for the sentence, hanging surely, drawing and quartering perhaps. The king pardoned him, not just pardoned, rewarded. Blood received Irish lands worth £500 a year. His accomplices walked free, unpunished. Talbot Edwards and his family were awarded less than £300, a sum that was never fully paid. Edwards died 3 years later and was buried at St. Peter's ad Vincula in the Tower. Some historians believe the pardon wasn't mercy. King Charles was desperately short of money in 1671. Blood had connections to the Duke of Buckingham, a powerful courtier. The confession about the Thames assassination might have been leverage, or theatre, or insurance. The heist might have had the king's tacit approval, a way to collect insurance, to later claim the jewels had been devalued, or to settle political scores. Blood lived another 9 years as a familiar figure at court. When he died in 1680, authorities were so convinced he'd faked his death that they exhumed his body to confirm it was really him. Blood succeeded not by escaping, but by refusing to act like a criminal. He demanded an audience, he critiqued the crown, he confessed to regicide, and he walked out with a pension. In the court of Charles II, audacity was currency. Talbot Edwards, bludgeoned and stabbed in service to the crown, received less than £300, never paid in full. History remembers the thief's name. The keeper is a footnote. Did Blood act alone, or did the king orchestrate the theft of his own crown? The pardon suggests mercy, the pension suggests complicity. The truth died with them both, but the crown, flattened by a mallet and hidden under a parson's coat, still sits in the tower, and no one has tried to steal it since. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who can't sleep. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.